it goes like ooh, yeah, yeah. And it goes like ooh, yeah, yeah. When I press play, all I hear is you. And it goes like ooh, yeah, yeah. When I press play, all I hear is you. Oh, every single song tells me we're through. Yeah, but I can't turn it off 'cause it's the truth. Yeah, it's the truth. And it goes like
A social problem can be documented in hundreds of ways in files and essays, but it takes one artwork to sum up and explain the essential problem or emotion we are trying to convey. In this conversation, we discuss some of the current simple and symbolic ways to demystify social ills and speak directly to the hearts of its viewers and audience in promoting social change. Good afternoon. My name is Philisiwe Precious Mazibuko. I am a communications facilitator, and I'll be your facilitator for this afternoon's panel discussion in discussing social change image symbols. Today, we have two amazing guests who will be joining us and taking us through some of the work that they do and how they are trying to create or conjure up social change through the work that they do in the art influence spaces. And my panel or my people, the guests that I have this evening or this afternoon are Dr. Carla and Haroon Gunn Salie. Hi guys, can you give us a wave? There they are. There they are. Thank you so much. So we'll get straight into it. I think what we can start by discussing is well, who you are. 2 minutes for giving us a bit of an intro into who you are, what is it that you do, and how do you bring your creative juices into the work that you do. Can we start? We'll start with Carla.
Okay, hello everyone, and thank you so much for that intro. I am Carla. I research creativity, performance, social change at the University of Cape Town, but I also lecture outside, and I'm really excited to speak about some of that because I am lecturing on some of Haroon's work, which he doesn't know. Over to you, Haroon.
Thanks, Carla, and thanks, Philisiwe. I'm Haroon Gunn. I'm an artist and an activist from Cape Town, where I'm presenting to you from tonight at home. And I've been making some quite radical actions over the last decade. And yeah, it's a great honor to be on this panel and talking about these burning issues.
Thank you guys so much. I think just to get the conversation started on our first question is maybe can you tell us something about an artistic experience that you've had that has left a deep impression on you and led you down a significant path in your life, or maybe it could be how you got into the industry and how'd you find your passion into the work that you do.
I think, Haroon, you should take this one first, and I'll
Oh
chime
my
in.
word! Oh my word! Um, well, I think as a singular artistic experience, I'd like to cite my involvement in the graffiti art movement. I was painting graffiti for about four years, which is also what spurred me on to submit a portfolio to the University of Cape Town's Michaela School of Fine Art. And when I did that portfolio of submission, my professor in the end actually told me years later that I certainly didn't get in on my portfolio and my artistic rigor, but actually on my letter of motivation, because that's how they spot conceptual artists coming into an art school. So I definitely want to sort of look at that as an artistic experience. It definitely was very much part of why I practice as an art activist today.
Awesome, thanks.
I think for me, my interest in performance has always been from an academic perspective. And I've struggled for many years working with what is performance when it's held in theoretical ways, in an archive, or it's spoken about or written about. And how do we teach that? How do we hold that as an educatable moment? What are we trying to get out of it? So artworks that for me have been the most exciting or moments in the arts have been ones that have translated to the classroom simply, easily, and in ways that have excited students to move beyond the work into their own creative responses. And I've found that street arts, very much like Haroon, movements really speak to students. something they feel they could replicate or might want to. We were just looking in class last week about chalking and how anyone can pick up a piece of chalk. And in fact, I handed my students chalk. And there's a lot of movements of writing down catcalls in different cities and moving them onto Instagram. The things that often men say to femme-presenting people, and them then chalking those words on the pavement. And this is something that's very, very simple and accessible, cheap, easy entry point. And I think it's works like that because they work so well in the classroom, to move outside of it have really, really excited me.
All right. Thank you guys so much. And that really sums up. That's a great way to intro into the work that you do. In fact, I think it works in so well with the work that you were saying, Haroon, about being doing graffiti art and street art and becoming an art activist. And what do you think might be like? How could you say are the risks that come with being an outspoken artist? Because I would imagine doing something like graffiti, which is partly illegal, could get you into a lot of trouble. But what do you think is one of the riskiest things that comes with being an active or outspoken activist in your line of work?
I think that's a very important question. And I would like to give two examples. The first is, I suppose, where it definitely came to my advantage, and the second is that when it definitely comes full circle to my disadvantage. Work I did almost 10 years ago, 9.5 years ago, in Cape Town. I was busy with an intergenerational project with District 6 veteran residents. And I was having an exhibition in one of the new homes of the Phase 2 redevelopment of District 6. This was in 2013. And I sat on my computer and I invited people to an exhibition in Tennant Street, District 6. And it was such a horrible moment for me because, of course, at that time, the area was named Zonnebloem, and it had been renamed Zonnebloem at the point at which all the forced removals was happening to permanently erase the history of the people. And why it was so terrible for me was that I was so easily able, through my own identification of what the area should be, to change it and to invite people to my exhibition in District 6, not Zonnebloem. But of course, that's step one. So step two was that I then realized I had to just go and change the road signs so that people coming to the exhibition would have come to a space that has been completely altered through that exhibition, right? And that is 13
Yeah.
charges of malicious damage to property, to state property, because I changed all 13 road signs in
Yeah.
Zonnebloem to read District 6. And it was a massive risk, to one's own livelihood or, whatever. But at the same time, it was a risk that was taken for the collective benefit of the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who still suffer through forced removals and the unresolved issues that we didn't finish at the end of apartheid. So as a person of a first generation born in the Cape Flats, I felt I had to go and instigate that act of criminality in order to create a change that I just believed had to be done, right? Um,
Right.
and almost 10 years later, every single one of those artworks are still on the roads in Cape Town, right? Even though in 2019, the area was formally renamed to District 6 nationally, the street signs that signalize the area's existence in reality are still changed through that piece of art activism. So if you're really looking at how to measure social change, it's a piece that has had effect, right? And I think that's part of what we're talking about here today. And I did have a
Yeah.
second point, but I don't know if I'm running over time and I should hand over. Cool. The second point is, of course, I've developed a practice that's quite radical, and that practice by nature then puts itself into conflict with the very institutions that would potentially host that art. And I found myself as a result, making a pretty successful career by the fact that I've got a good reputation. Fantastic. But, it's by nature conflictual, and I have to constantly take that on. And in the institutions that I work with, understand that inviting me in means that they might get a knife jabbed into their wall if that's what they need, right? So that's the other side of the coin.
Funnily enough, Haroon, I was thinking of those exact two examples, so I'm so glad you raised them. The first, what I set my students for their final assignment, which we'll talk about later. But the second one of also the dangers of working within institutions, because there are two dangers for artists, really. The working outside of an institution and being unprotected, acting of your own accord, which you've done so successfully, and working within, because then you are stifled, you are held, you are constrained. And I've spoken and interviewed, including yourself, many artists and activists and people who do both. And I've asked them the same question of how do you handle putting your body often on the line? And how do you keep yourself safe? And all of them have spoken about whether it's an activist, where people from NGOs say, we take funding and our funders will not allow us to do certain actions. We're constrained. Or whether it's, we don't have funding, we are solo, we can do anything we want, but we know how police treat Black bodies on the street. And we feel responsible for the people who come along. So I'm so glad you brought up those two examples, which I think parallel the experience for people who work more on the street and people who work more within institutions in the art world as well.
Thank you guys so much. And those are incredible inputs about really just the history and the line of the work that you've been doing, which is great. And I mean, it's amazing, Haroon, that you would have started something, 10 years ago, and it's still being able to be used as a mark, as an indicator of your activism back then and how that has continued as into the work that you're doing so much. So now we'll video that we get into the conversation, get us to see and hear other contexts from Kyla Hazell.
Hey, my name is Kyla Hazell from Dufuna Ukwazi. That is Alderman J.P. Smith, the City of Cape Town Councillor for Safety and Security. And we're here to tell you about a creative protest action of a zombie march that we did with Reclaim the City back in 2019. So the message that we wanted to communicate with this protest was that the City of Cape Town's actions, policies, bylaws, their decision-making around land and housing was reinforcing the ideology of spatial apartheid, which should have died in the past. Instead, we were seeing it very much alive in the present. And so we decided to give the message that Cape Town is run by old Nats who are carrying on with the same ideas, just under a different system or a different government. We did this by all dressing up as zombies and going to stage a dramatic or theatrical intervention where we acted out the scene of old NP members coming back to applaud the city for how effectively they were implementing the old spatial apartheid ideology in the present. We chose this creative technique because we thought it could get our message across in a new way. In a country that has a really high number of protests every single day, sometimes people see a protest and they dismiss it without really engaging with the message. So creative activism is a way to get people's attention again. It also has an opportunity to get people's empathy or understanding, because a moment of laughter or a smile, or even that spark of creativity and curiosity that people seeing something artistic, is a chance for them to be more open to receiving the message that you're communicating. And a third thing is that it makes it more difficult to respond with repression, because when something is very clearly playful and humorous and teasing, and it also has public attention for those reasons. It's harder for authorities to crack down with any brutality or aggression, which would seem very obviously inappropriate to the public. So we kind of took advantage of all of this, and we really lent in to being cheeky and being ridiculous, using the visual imagery, the coloring of the old party, but obviously using it ironically.
I think that Philisiwe had to drop off the feed there, but fortunately, I am in a great position to respond to this, and I'm so excited because I was at this protest, and I've spoken to Kyla and Yusra about the work that they've done with the Yes Men, who are an American satirical organization that came to work with Reclaim the City. And I actually also took some of my students to this protest because I wanted to see how different it felt for them to be in a space of levity, of lightness, of humor, and to feel politics that were light, family-oriented. And what I particularly loved about the space was that everyone was involved. The kids were dressed up. It was a huge, fun event. But my students said afterwards, what did it do? How did it do anything? And we unpacked it a bit. And I said, well, why don't you Google J.P. Smith? Why don't you just put him in and do an image search right now? And they did. And what came up? But his head on a stick next to apartheid politicians. First 2 lines of the Google image search. It was absolutely blocked, the news, the images, for several months afterwards, with this particular images from this protest that were so strong that they were shared across so many platforms. And so he was tied as an individual to this issue of apartheid era, spatial apartheid, in a way that I think must have been very embarrassing and very difficult from a PR point of view, and extremely personal. So we both experienced the protest in space and really thought through the longevity of those moments that may seem small and light, but also build community, build a sort of activism from a very young age, and make it associated with something that isn't always anger, isn't always confrontation, which I think is a very nice mix of ways of holding political space. I don't know, Haroon, if you're familiar with the protest as well.
It's the first time I've seen it, but I was just on the edge of my seat there. I think Kyla's presentation of it also did it so much justice in terms of explaining how the use of art can actually tamper down response to incredibly radical political action, right? And I also think very critically there's a tertiary level to that, is in terms of how captivating that response could be from potential audiences. So, we're really quite used to people picketing, with a placard, but the moment that you bring all of that heightened drama and dramatics and creative expression to it, you really are able to capture viewers on street level and potentially also influence them in a way that otherwise just a standard picket would not ever manage to do. So I think it was a highly successful piece of protest art. It was wonderful to watch.
Humor is such a tool, because, as I think Kyla said, it is very hard to respond to without seeming like a spoilsport. And I think Yusra is popping into the chat here some really important nuance to this, which of course is that in some ways this protest was also problematic because the city responded extremely defensively. Not, it should be said, necessarily to the actual live march, but the organization that partnered, as I understand it, with Reclaim the City, the American organization Yes Men, who've done incredible work at parodying CEOs, pretending to be CEOs, issuing press releases that are then believed, did the same thing. in Cape Town, and I believe issued a City of Cape Town press release announcing affordable housing options, social housing, all the things we would love to see the city announcing. And this, because it looked so real, I think backfired for a lot of activists who had been painstakingly trying to engage with the city, who then shut down walls of communication. But I think perhaps we can make a distinction between the humor and the live action event and the way that that was then taken into sort of official documentation, which perhaps was a little different. Just to acknowledge Yusra's comment. Philisiwe, are you back with us?
Mic check, 1 2 1 2. Mic check.
I think perhaps she's still having a little bit of sound issue.
Sure. If I can just briefly also respond to Yusra's post here, because I mean, I think you really have to actually ask yourself, therefore, what was the intent in the first place? Because if that backfiring, which is a potential problem for the overall movement and the cause that they were trying to highlight, if that caused the detriment to the kind of longevity of that, maybe there's a kind of need to quite seriously consider that as or at least what part of it was actually the sort of drove the city away, because as you actually want to, as an art activist, elevate or somehow aid or align with the social movements that you're working to strengthen. And if it ends up backfiring, I mean, one must sort of quite seriously just be like, okay, what part of that, if it is as you described, the sort of taking on the authorial voice of the city, perhaps that is where activist groups and art activists particularly have to also understand the legalities in which you're playing. I mean, we're very fortunate in South Africa to have freedom of expression, which governs not only your words, but actually your actual actions of dissent. But there's, of course, in this example, the potential for taking on, potentially a fraudulent but definitely kind of impersonating a state entity that, yes, you should break the law in order to make a point, but not if that actually counters the point that you were trying to make.
So much of this needs communication, I think, between all the players. And this was a collaborative protest between a local organization, one of many engaging with land right issues and doing incredible work, NU, and an American organization. And I think perhaps the lesson here is real engagement with local players before something as risky as that is taken. Not to throw the Yes Man under the bus. I think they're a fantastic and really powerful organization doing exciting work. But in this case, well, the counterpoint to it seemed to have done damage with relations with the city is this may be an area where someone with less stakes might be very fruitful and make sort of quite fruitful inroads. It clearly, the idea of fake news or authorial voice might be an area for a different kind of activism to play with in the future. Are you able to hear us?
Part of the challenge of South African cities is that we haven't yet found an imaginary as powerful as the apartheid city imaginary. If we don't figure out creative and innovative ways of building inclusive spaces in South African cities, it is a ticking time bomb and it's going to catch up with us. Challenges that we are dealing mostly with would be around various forms of urban vulnerability.
There's economic inequalities, more and more homeless women and homeless children living on the streets. There's still a lot of gender-based violence, specifically in the inner city.
So the Feast of the Clowns started first time in 2000, at the time when the inner city changed from being white to being predominantly black.
The Feast of the Clowns is an annual community festival that seeks to engage with a lot of different communities regarding their specific injustice issues within the inner city. A lot of people don't necessarily go into the inner city because of the negative connotations that exist.
And so we wanted the feast to be a celebration of the city, a celebration of the diversity of the city. It's also a place of creating awareness around social justice issues in the city. Usually it kicks off with the March of the Clowns, which is kind of a playful protest parade. And it's also about non-violence. We have to get our messages and our issues across without destroying stuff. We want to rebuild.
We have a number of social justice workshops that happen prior to the main festival day.
We acknowledge that there is theology being done for many years at the grassroots by the Tshwane Leadership Foundation. It's expressed in the Feast of the Clowns, and we need to learn from the theologies done at grassroots, liberating, life-affirming theologies.
Just you and me, Haroon.
Cool. Yeah.
Well, I personally really enjoyed that video, so I think we got a little bit to discuss.
Yes.
Again, I think it connects with the playfulness and the family-friendly, fun, community-building aspect of artivism or activism, which, again, I find so enjoyable because I often think of political art as needing to be confrontational, disruptive. But this is all community building and caring and I think very powerful in a different way because of that.
I mean, I think it was, just to agree with you completely, it was a very powerful project. I mean, I within that noticed that there were a number of strategies that they employed alongside each other, right? There was what seemed to be an event-based thing where they had the performances. There also seemed to be murals that were painted alongside. I mean, I think that's another strategy which leaves a longer term mark, I suppose, on the city of than a potential event, but not necessarily a bigger effect on those who witnessed or attended it. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's value in both experiential art and the sort of more permanent mark making in the city.
I see we have Yusra joining.
Hi guys. In while Philisiwe is having such trouble, and obviously I'm so excited to be a part. But yeah, it's like wanting to ask, like really, how do we make change happen? I mean, we are looking at artistic processes. For me, the biggest thing with protest has always been protest has just been reduced to like a comment. I've said to this to you, Carla, like it's just a comment on the radio, like, there's a protest on the N1, use another route, and no one ever tells you what the protest is about. And then on the other end, we've got your interventions, Haroon, and all the ones that you've looked at, Carla, like Sibongile Ngoma's sit-in at the National Arts Council for, 70 days? And, I was quite involved in watching that and trying to activate people in Cape Town. But if I'm not mistaken, the NAC isn't quite, transformed. I think I got tired of that, and it's more transparent now. But what are we going to do to iron out this corruption in this country with what we've got? How do we inspire people to make change? I'm throwing the big questions at you.
A pretty big question. You're trying to come in and drop that one. Don't leave us with it.
Yeah,
you stay with us now.
Out.
We're going to unpick it together. Haroon, do you want the first unpick, or shall we?
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, I think Yusra's really jumped into the back end there, and it's great. Thank you for joining us. I don't feel qualified on telling you how to stamp out corruption. but I definitely feel qualified a little bit on how to inspire people to make a change. I mean, I think that's what I'm trying to do in my own self. And if I look inside, it always starts from getting angry about something. It starts with being terribly discomfortable or uncomfortable with a state in society, so much so that you actually need to make a change to that, so that not only you experience, but everyone else doesn't experience that issue that you're incensed about. I think people being more angry, people being more upset, but then figuring out creative ways of channeling that, not in self-harm or not in harm of movements, but actually in to try and get what you want. And what is that? You want change. You want more accountable leadership. You want better acting people. You want more agency in society. There's so many other ways, without necessarily stopping this completely endemic, corrupt society we live in, to make a difference. So, I mean, that's what I would say. I mean, I think we all need to be more uncomfortable and more driven to actually fix things around us.
Carla, yeah.
I have two things I'm thinking of immediately that jump on the back of that. Thanks for starting us, Haroon. Let's riff on this. The first one is a little bit of boo academic theory that I actually think is very useful. I read this wonderful book, which of course I can't remember the name of, but which said, in order for change, social change to happen, you need activism that does two things. One, sustained. It's like the sustained wave that keeps going. And that needs institutions. You need strong NGOs. You need strong, continual attempts to engage with formal politics. And they tend to be quite conservative. They have to be, because they need to keep good relationships with formal politics. But they're great structures to build your base on. And then there's the thing you can't plan for, but you have to learn to seize, which is your zeitgeist moment. And that's the momentum. That's the throwing excrement on a statue because everything is built up. That's the moment where someone takes a knee and it takes off. And that is the moment where your structures have to recognize and not feel alienated by this more radical act, which isn't necessarily what they would do, but join forces, respond to the oomph that comes that you can't plan for, and sustain it in creative and different ways using the networks that they have. So that is how they say change happens, and I fully agree with it. We can't force those moments, but we can build those structures, whether they're in the arts, where people are becoming known and working with institutions to spread their reach so that when a moment like that happens, everyone can respond to it in a different form, or whether it's in activism in NGOs. The other thing I'm thinking of, which is actually quite sobering, because I have access to a lot of young people who theoretically are interested in these things. And what I'm realizing from teaching a lot of 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds is that the political knowledge of the young people, whatever that term is terrifying. I assigned Haroon's Zonnebloem Renamed as a final essay, looking at where the artwork is, which is an interesting debate. But I'd say 95% of them did not know about the forced removals in District 6.
Sure.
And they're 19. I polled my students. I said, where do you get your news from? A third said, I try not to look at news. I actively try not to. 2/3, TikTok. And only 2 people out of a class of 50 looked at any mainstream news.
Sure. So they actively avoid.
And I understand it. I fully understand how overwhelming, and we're living in a pre-apocalypse. It's very overwhelming, and we're sick of. I think many people are sick of having history shoved at them. They must study it, which is where art can come in. This is how I'm teaching politics in my class. I'm teaching an art class that is teaching them politics. because they are not interested in politics. And that is not every student, of course, but I'm getting a very sobering look at how social change happens. We need to reframe these political issues so that young people understand and engage with them. And that's where the arts can really help us.
What is that, like disguising the political issue? Or
No, it's not a sugared pill at all. It is just understanding that the ways we're talking about politics is alienating people, and it is not working a lot of the time.
how do you connect your work to your audiences? I mean, I'm just thinking about your installation, or however you describe it, at the castle, the graves. I mean, you can only see that from above. I mean, you can walk past it and you can kind of get a sense, but you've got to actually see it. So where do you put it out, and what are the responses, and who are the people who are responding to it?
Well, I'll just give a brief description of what it is first.
Sure.
It's a public artwork, which is quite unique because it's a citizen-led initiative. Okay, so there's been no state behind it. There's been no city behind it. I did it completely out of my own initiative, and it's the size just a little bit smaller than a soccer field. Before I started on the site, it was mainly gravel, and through 8 months, 9 months actually, pretty much a full gestation period, I, with my best friend, dug 118 graves.
Sure.
Okay, they're not 2 meters deep. They are about a meter at the very maximum. And from the elevation of the castle, actually from the perspective of the gods, all of these 118 graves meticulously read the word justice, right? Very simple statement. I understand. But the point is that you're dealing with public art. You don't want your message to be lost in the incoherence of everyone needing to read a whole lot of text and theory on the piece. What does it mean to have 118 graves shouting to the heavens asking for justice? Well, that's because our state has failed us, the courts have failed us, right? And it's a memorial to the 118 people who've died at the hands of security police in detention. That's people like Imam Haroon, who I'm named after, Ahmed Timmel, even Steve Biko, are still presumed to have fallen down the stairs, jumped out of buildings, and died of not state violence. And until that record is overturned, all those families have, and us as a society, have to just live with this lie, right? And I can't deal with that. So that then drove me to look for a space, find a space, negotiate with the company that, well, actually it's a state entity that manages the castle, and say, hey, I'd like to do this citizen-led memorial. Can I have the permission? Got the permission, and that was the biggest challenge, because then I had to go and dig it, right? But at the same time, the project is aligned to a long project that I've been working on. I've been working with the Imam Haroon's family, and I've made work with his widow, who is passed 2 years ago, and all of his children. His ongoing projects and work that I've been doing with them. I'm also working with the South African Coalition for Transitional Justice, who are a collection of NGOs working for justice in all of these matters. So, last week I was in the court, in the Cape Town High Court, working with the Imam Haroon's family and the lawyers representing the family, and I painted a life-size version of Imam Haroon's autopsy report. So the forensic pathologist, who's actually from Durban, Steve Naidu, was able to use this life-size version of all the 27 bruises on Imam's body as in the court. And the very last statement that the judge made in his closing requests were, could he keep the artwork because it would be very beneficial to his verdict. So 2 things happened there. Right. The one was this constant persistence on a citizen-led initiative, working alongside, trying to raise attention to these issues. And the other is deep commitment to inclusionary process. So much so that what we have for the first time in South African history is we have an artwork used as a piece of evidence in a court.
Wow.
And that is huge. That is like, for
Huge.
someone who wants to do art and social justice like this, that's like the biggest thing that could actually happen, because that means that other cases that lack evidence could bring a drawing, or could bring a piece of artwork from a witness, or from and have that admissible in a court. So we are
Incredible.
yeah.
Do you have a picture? Or I'll get it from
I'm
you later.
just pulling one up.
When is the judgment? Do you know when the judgment's supposed to come out, or how are they
Yeah,
going to put this?
the judge has probably in the next 2 or 3 months.
Okay.
Yeah,
Are you looking for a picture on your phone?
sure.
Yes, I was gonna, but I think I'll leave that one to Haroon.
That's so cool. That's so cool. Carla, what is your international? Well, Haroon looks for it. I mean, you've been looking at this all over the world. What are the? I mean, when things happen in the States, they sort of pop off wilder than they pop off here. And I mean, what are these things that are happening in your research that are in other countries that are really working in terms of arts and social justice?
Well, funnily enough, the things that have been standing out to me over the past couple of years have been Latin America, or have been, where else? Well, we had the haircutting in Iran, of course, after the death of Masa Amini. The rapist song, Chile, The Rapist Is You, A Rapist in Your Path. More close to home, of course, we had the gesture for Fees Must Fall that was replicated in artwork with a downloadable poster by Faith 47. And I think, to me, what the trend is that the easier, more repeatable, more democratic access this very simple thing is, the more it's possible for people to enact it themselves and sing or pose or take a photo or incorporate it into their own embodied repertoires. The more it goes on TikTok, the more it goes around the world. So a very simple song with simple choreography, a gesture, an act, is something that is very creative and extremely replicable and powerful. You think of the man in the green blanket stencil around Cape Town. By the way, quick interdict there, where one of my students said, "Oh, what's that about? I thought the guy was just cold."
Maybe he was as well. Let's just give them that.
And I had to explain Maracana to 19-year-olds.
But I think it speaks a lot to the deluge of media that you receive as a younger person. I mean, if you're born today, you get photographed like 60 times in the first minute. So, you're overwhelmed. So it's interesting to see how student movements will progress with a generation who's been flooded with media and who's actively avoiding the news outside of the segment who's maybe doing politics.
You have to meet them in the spaces they're at and not feel that that's a downgrading. It's just a different media.
Would a younger generation run from Ndifuna Kwazi, where I worked, my other hat, if Ndifuna Kwazi was on TikTok? Would the content be like, because in my personal experience, me being on TikTok, it's my escape place, my fun place, and seeing the mayor of Cape Town talking about mayor of Cape Town things, and I was like, oh, go away. Like, this is not the space. I don't want you here. I'll find you somewhere else. But here, I want to see people, running into walls and making fun of, making that kind of jokes. Because it's humor. It's always been humor. But what happens if you become the boring people who, not boring, but the things that people are actively trying to avoid? How do you...
Well, I think that was
really love.
Yeah. So no, sorry, I'm excited to just say that I think actually TikTok's a great space for that. I mean, I think both of those two protests that we watched in those videos, it was Reclaim the City, or was that Ndifuna Kwazi? I mean, you guys worked together.
So I wasn't there. Carla can actually tell you.
Well, I heard it cited as a Reclaim the City protest from Kyla on the video. it's that's a wonderful space for that kind of political action that uses art and humor. And I mean, I think that there's a way to like there's this concept of art jamming, right, where you take mass media and advertising and you use it for a political agenda. So you have, as you very rightly said, 70% of the class only receiving their news on TikTok. And if you're trying to reach that audience, you've got to be there, and you've got to be, using these highly effective modes of protest art to engage with people creatively. I mean, I think it's the right space for it. Sorry if it annoys you in your feed, though.
Yeah, the content's just got to be better. Like,
I think you're right. The content's just got to be different. And I want to talk about this more, but I really want to see that picture that Haroon's found.
yes.
Oh, cool.
I really want to just.
I don't know if
don't
you'll
wanna
even be
lose
able to
that
see
moment.
this on the screen.
I can see it. Those are the
Right.
graves.
Oh, it's in reverse, is it?
Well, now it says something,
Put down and reverse
A little-
it.
You can see it online. It's called Crying for Justice if anyone's interested.
But that's
And on your
sustained effort.
Instagram, I know there's a piece of the artwork you submitted for testimony. I know that's on your Instagram. So if people want that.
Yeah, but I think, it's that sustained effort that Carla was talking about, your work with Imam Haroon's family. Not all of it is public. I mean, obviously the work that you did, which was at the Biennale recently. Sorry, I don't know the name. I know the work if I see it. With
It's
the
called Amongst
fears-
Men.
Hmm?
Amongst Men.
Amongst Men. Yeah, the funeral. Like I've that's been going for a long time. And all these other things that you've done along the way, and then and then you have these things that and then end up in court papers, which is incredible. Like I think it's you just got to keep going until something connects, like when society is ready for it. If you do things on social media, then you do your best content, and you never know what's going to take off, and then something does and something doesn't, and you do the same thing in a row, and it works one day, doesn't work the next day.
One of the things I really deeply respect about Haroon's work and his praxis, because you work deeply with communities. You don't helicopter in and make a work about something that inspires you. You are embedded in, and you work incredibly ethically and deeply within, not just making one work, but connecting with the people it connects to, which I think is a great example for how to engage ethically and carefully with these difficult subjects. But backtracking to Yusra and TikTok, because I suddenly thought, it's not the place for heaviness, but I think it is the place for politics. I think there's great ways of introducing viral content. And in South Africa, we've got a real tradition of working with puppets and personas, whether the puppets are Chester Missing or the persona is a Vita or Coconut Kells, or we talk about things via something distant from us, and that makes for great viral content. And I think that might be a way for NU to think about having a puppet figure or something that can slightly distance from the serious work you do with the actual researchers.
Yeah, I think NU's I've joined NU in the last 2 years, but it's managed to build a space for itself that it can allow itself to be a little bit cheekier than any other NGO I've ever come across in my life. But other NGOs don't have that. They haven't cultivated that. And I don't know, can go into why. But it's not all NGOs that have that. NU is the only space that will do it. And similarly with artists, I mean, Haroon, you dug all those graves by yourself. I mean, even if you got funded, you still would have had to dig it yourself. But it's also always that tricky line between being able to do things without funding and then doing them by yourself. And, just interestingly, like, what are the works that have come out of Infecting the City, which have delved deeply into communities? Looking at their call, they said, look, we're looking for political works. And so I'm kind of thinking, who's going to apply? And will they have the depths of working with community that sort of kind of Haroon has, or so like does the Infecting the City platform create, maybe Carla and Haroon, you can comment on it more, because maybe you know the program more, but do they really get into the depths of community working, community change? Or is it just a surface level engagement, like, oh, we're doing a piece at the Slave Lodge or Green Market Square at the tree stump? I'm not familiar with the work, and this is no criticism on them, but just as a platform, as a kind of platform. I also see Faye's question.
Well, this is a good moment to actually punt Infecting the City, which are currently open for proposals. And the theme this year, as Yusra said, is activism. But a great moment to critique as well. How is the city your playground, and whose playground is it? What part of the city, what spaces are so-called infected? What does that mean to do? I don't want to speak on behalf of Jay and his very careful engagements, but I think those are very important and valid questions to engage and ask. And I think I would encourage people to apply and test those boundaries of where we can put works and who can. And I think this is the perfect call for that.
I think basically we need more. And that's not to say that the institutions such as Infecting the City with a long history aren't doing a lot, but I think we need more. And particularly we need more independent movements like NU, like what we're seeing in these examples, that don't conform to institutions, that can't by their nature. Because yes, there are artistic expressions, but the potentially might be so conflicting to the art world that they couldn't be associated with it. So I mean, I'm actually asking a different question. I'm asking a question: what else should there be alongside these long-established institutions of performance art, where you go to a program, 4:00, you'll be at the slave church, radical action in the city, but the city knows, police have been informed, it's like, cool, yes, you can enact your art in that forum and it could be validated, but what are you trying to do with that action, and how would being part of that program potentially undo that radicalism?
Sure. That's so much food for thought. Just to respond to Faye's question, the former director of NU, Mandisa, was, can't tell you how old Mandisa is, but I actually don't know. But yes, there was a lot of young energy that came into NU, and its boulder dashing way that it went into the NGO sector. But I think, yes, a lot of the people at NU are, on average, I think, under the age of 30. And I think that is significant in the work and energy that NU has had. In my experience of working in the NGO sector, I've never worked with so many people who aren't yet 30. Normally it's the other way around. I think in arts NGOs, what happens is you have artists who are independent, and then as they get older, they form NGOs. So the energy is different, whereas this particular NGO of Ndifuna Kwazi has just got an incredibly young energy, very young average age, and I think that has contributed to a lot of the wild things that sort of some of the people have done here, because there's nothing holding back. There's no like, oh, I've done that before and it's not going to work. There's a lot of energy of let's just do that, and let's go with it, which I think has contributed a lot to it. There are 3 minutes left. Closing thoughts from you guys. Gentlemen first. Let's flip it up.
I think this has been a very thorough discussion. I think the one thing I want to just quickly add, just is around, I don't know how many people are actually in the room here, but I mean, I hope that we have managed to not lay issues out in an easy way. I mean, if you really want to effect change through your art, it's going to be an uncomfortable journey. So I hope we didn't make this panel too light in the way, because I think anyone who's really going to take lessons from this are not going to take easy lessons from this. It's going to be a hard path, and I really appreciate the level of grounding it's had in social practice, and thanks for coming in, Yusra, when we had technical difficulties. Very much appreciated.
Obviously, I'm glad I could be here.
I just want to end by saying what a pleasure it's been, a joy. I always enjoy talking to you, Haroon, and always Yusra. So it's really felt like a family living room here. And I was thinking about, often the arts are seen as something luxurious or extraneous to politics, but really imagining a different world requires creativity. It requires imagination is creative, and fundamentally social change requires us to create, enact, perform. We must act now. Social movements are, based on the word move. We must do things that are embodied creative. It is fundamental to politics. It isn't a luxury. And do what we can with what we have, where we are, until that momentum moment.
It's actually just such a beautiful point that you've mentioned, just to bring this whole festival actually to a close. Our first talk was on arts coverage in the media, and Linda Kuchler Nkosi said that one of South Africa's first newspapers, half of it was dedicated to arts and culture. And I think that just to remind us of where it's been and the importance and power it has had, because it captures the temperament of a society. And today it's just considered entertainment, and it's just a ruse to hide behind the power that it really has. So thank you guys for ending this festival. It's ended where it's needed to end it, and it's been very exciting. And I'm so glad. I'm sorry, Philisiwe, that you've had technical problems, but I'm really glad that I've had a chance. And there goes my laptop. But yeah, thank you very much, guys, and thank you to Bash, and thank you to Piwid, Nomtandazo, Bali, and Scout. You guys have been incredible. Thank you to Sipindile and to Ishmael, the arts advocate who is fighting the battles on the behind the scene. Okay, thank you very much, guys, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Take care.